Welcome to the third session of our discussions of urban sociology. Now, this time around, we're looking at the theories which explain urbanization. Remember, we identified two major definitions of urbanization. We identify the demographic definition as well as the cultural definition. So basically, the theories which explain urbanization are into two broad categories: the demographic theories as well as the cultural theories. We're going to begin this session with the cultural theories. Now, we start off by looking at the nature of theory. What is a theory? A theory simply is a general proposition which has the capacity of explaining and predicting behavior. In a much more specific definition, a theory, as suggested by Alfred Schultz, refers to the explicit formulation of determinate relations between a set of variables, in terms of which a fairly extensive class of empirically ascertainable regularities can be explained. So basically, the main function of theories is to explain and predict behavior. The cultural theories attempt to focus on how to explain the changes that the migrant experiences when he comes from the village to the urban area. And there are two theories that we discussed in the slide that you should be reading to find out the details of those theories. We looked at the theory of the culture of urbanism, which was formulated by Wirth. Wirth focused on a number of factors which transition the migrant from his urban perception of things to the rural, to the urban, transforms the migrant, transform the migrant from his rural perception of things to the urban perception. For example, he identified the non-personal involvement of people in other people in the urban area. What he says basically is this, that because of the intensity of urban life, it is absolutely impossible for people in the urban areas to spend a lot of time trying to interact on a personal basis with other people, because they're in a rush, they're in a hurry to go to their offices, traffic jams. So when a person gets up in the morning, he wants to arrive pretty early in his office to be able to start his job on time. For example, the change here can be explained by the fact that in the rural communities, when you meet a friend of yours, or when you meet a kinsman, or when you meet a brother or a sister, you need to stop and greet that person properly and show how personally involved you are with the life of that person. Typically, you look at the Ewe tradition. When you are in the Volta region and you meet a person who is an Ewe, who is related to you or probably a friend, you have to stop in the middle of the street, if you like, or wherever you meet a person, you have to stop and exchange greetings. And that greetings may last for about 5 minutes, because he's going to begin by saying, "Indi now," then you have to say, "Indi, the viaude, udo, sronyaude, togbiao." And he mentions quite a number of people, and you have to say "odo, odo" all the time. And when he or she finishes, it is now your turn to begin to ask about the people in his family. And he continues to say "odo, oli, odo, oli," until by the time you're done, you would have spent about 5 minutes of greeting, which demonstrate the extent to which you are personally involved, the people that you meet in the street, in the villages. In the urban area, you don't have that kind of time. You meet a person in the street, and you're in a hurry to reach wherever you're going. You say, "Hello, Charlie, how are you doing? Have a good day." It takes just about 2 seconds for you to exchange greetings with that person. You're not personally involved this time around. You don't stop and ask him about his wife, his children, his grandfather, and all of those other people, which is possible in the villages. So there is a change in the value system. In a village, it is personal involvement. In the urban area, you don't have time to be involved personally with those you meet in the street. Another factor which is worthy of mentioning, remember that I'm giving just a summary of the critical points. You needed to read all the details in the slides. Another factor which is worth mentioning is the factor of bureaucratization, which leads to the development of the organization man. A person who works in a bureaucracy leaves home early morning to arrive in his place of work, and is going to spend about 8 hours during the entire day. All of those 8 hours is not at all at home. And in the case of some other category of workers, for example, bankers, they spend even more hours in their workplace. For example, after close of hours, they have to balance their accounts. And by the time they're done with balancing the accounts, it's about 7 p.m., and they now have to set out to come home. By the time they arrive home, given the traffic, they probably come home around 9 p.m. All of that time, your family, your children are at home. You have no interaction whatsoever with them. The kind of quality time you're expected to spend with your children are spent working at home because of the bureaucracy. You came to the urban area and you're looking for where you've got a job, but that comes with a certain price that you have to pay. You spend a major part of your time working and less time with the people that basically you should be spending a major part of your time and quality time with. So that is about what the bureaucracy or organization man syndrome also contributes to the changes in our value systems. Commercialization in the villages, most of the things that we do for one another, you don't have to pay for it. You go to the farm, you harvest a lot of cassava, and you come home, you'll find that if you're not able to carry the load of cassava, you can have some young person carry it for you, and he's not going to ask you to pay him. Maybe you, out of your own generosity, may say that, okay, you can take four tubers of the yam or cassava to go and cook for yourself. They do not demand a price. In the urban areas, it is quite different. We have a group of people known as the Kayaye, and they charge commercial rates for every kind of help that they're able to give to people. So there again is a change in the value system in terms of the culture of urbanism. Now, Wirth also emphasized the point that because of the so much time that we spend in the bureaucracy, we lose touch with our kinsmen, so that kinship ties ultimately become replaced with associational ties. We do not have time to spend with our own brothers and sisters, but we have a lot of time to spend with our colleagues in the workplace. And that has quite a lot of impact on our traditional value systems. Remember that what these theories are trying to do is to explain the transition from traditional values to the urban values. The other theory that is worth looking at is the theory of psychic overload, which was developed by Milgram. Milgram defines psychic overload as the inability of the urban dweller to handle the sensory and the cognitive inputs that bombard him on a daily basis. In other words, the experiences that we have as urban dwellers in the urban communities are so many, and they are so fast. They come at us so fast that before we're able to process input A, input B would have been presented. As you're still struggling to process input A, input C is presented. So you end up carrying an overload of B and C. And that has a lot of implications for our life in the urban areas. For example, we can illustrate this by looking at our social life. If you have a problem, for example, having to do with the police, maybe you lost your laptop, that's a good example. You may have to go to the police and make a report, and the police tell you that, okay, you know what, we will work on it, you go and come. So the next day you go, they say, we're still working on it, we have not quite finished yet, you have to go and come. So you have a problem there that has not been resolved. Then you have a religious problem. You probably made a pledge of 200 Ghana cedis that you want to pay to the church towards the building fund. You have not redeemed that pledge yet. That is still standing. Then economically, maybe you needed a loan, or maybe you needed an import license to be able to import some goods into the country to sell. And you're working on that as well. It's not been done, so you have a problem with the police, you have a problem concerning how to redeem your pledge, and you have a problem with your import license. All of these constitute overload for us in the urban areas. Indeed, as suggested by Milgram, most of the people living in the urban communities, they carry overload. Other ways of explaining this overload has to do with the fashions that you see in the urban communities. For example, we may take miniskirt. Let's say one girl who may be called Jane has come into the urban area, and suddenly she sees that most of the other girls are wearing miniskirts, so she decides to get into a miniskirt as well. But she's not quite smart. She takes a lot of time getting used to the miniskirt. Each time she went out into town with the miniskirt, or wearing the miniskirt, she feels like people are staring at her because her legs are exposed. And if she happens to be wearing a mini blouse as well, maybe her boobs are equally exposed. So she's taking a lot of time to be able to adjust to the wearing of that miniskirt. As she is adjusting to that miniskirt, something else comes. Maybe what in the local language is called I'm aware comes. And she's still struggling to get used to the miniskirt. And then bareback comes. She's not used to the miniskirt yet. And then we have some other kind of fashion coming up. Basically, Milgram says that as she's struggling with the miniskirt, he has to carry the I am aware as well as the bareback as overloads. We can look at dances, which is much more illustrative, for example. If I can remember, Zonto, for example, came, and then a lot of people got used to or started learning Zonto. Some people are still learning Zonto. They haven't quite gotten used to it yet. In the meantime, something else came called the Al-Qaeda, which people began to learn because they want to be, trending. After Al-Qaeda, there's something else called SOCI or something else came, and people have to get used to that. But in the meantime, people like me are still trying to get used to the Zonto when others are doing the SOCI or something else. So I have to carry the overload of the Al-Qaeda and SOCI because I'm still struggling for Zonto. So that basically is because all of these experiences are coming so fast that you don't have time to process one experience, A, and B is already presented. And this has implications for living in the urban area. According to Milgram, the way to resolve that problem is what they call the conservation of psychic energy, in the sense that when people experience overload, they conserve psychic energy by setting priorities. In other words, you wake up in a day and you tell yourself that, listen, I'm going to achieve goal A, goal B, goal C. And I don't want anything to come between me and the attainment of those three goals today. You set yourself some priorities. When you when you set yourself priorities, basically what you end up doing is that you become completely impersonal. You're not interested in what other people are doing at all. You become superficial. You don't relate to people. You only relate to them on the surface. You're not deep. You're not deeply interested or morally involved in other people. You are transitory. You are fleeting in your relationship with other people. And those adaptations, they have quite serious implications for urban life in the sense that you become morally involved. I beg your pardon, you do not become morally involved with other people. A typical example is what happened to a certain lady in the United States, particularly in New York. She was attacked by a group of robbers in her apartment, and she shouted out loud for help. And according to Milgram, 38 different members of that community heard her crying for help, but none of them picked up the phone to call the police. Why? Because they are conserving psychic energy. They are not morally involved with other people. So that lady had to suffer the consequences of having no help. This is what happens to urban dwellers when they begin to experience all of these psychic overload. To the extent that some countries have passed a law saying that if you meet a person in the street who is being beaten up or is suffering some kind of negative consequence, and you don't stop to help that person, you will be arrested and prosecuted for refusing to help that person. So basically, these are the consequences of urban life. And I'm afraid we have not started to experience those consequences on a significant level quite yet, because we are not a complex urban society. But you stay tuned, because